Hi everyone, I'm Shivani Ramlochan, Project Manager for Bios and Bookmarks, powered by the NGC Bocas Lit Fest. We are already at the halfway mark of this season, Season 7, which we've called A Change is Gonna Come. As you may know, the reason we've called it that is in honor of the anthemic 1964 Sam Cooke ballad. This season has been all about the things that are gripping the world right now and how Caribbean writers, from the crucible and furnace and flame of where they are, can and do use their books to engender change. This episode's guest is Kei Miller, this year's winner of the 2022 OCM Bocas Non-Fiction Prize for Caribbean Literature for his searing book of essays, Things I Have Withheld, published by both Grove Atlantic and Canongate Books. Kei is joined in conversation by guest host Stephen Narain, and let me tell you a bit about Stephen. He was raised in the Bahamas by Guyanese parents and moved to Miami at 17. A graduate of Harvard College and the Iowa Writers Workshop, he is the recipient of a John Thuron Prize for Study at Cambridge University, a Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship for New Americans, the Small Axe Fiction Prize, the Alice Yard Prize for Art Writing, and the Bristol Short Story Prize. In 2012, Stephen was selected for the NGC Bocas Lit Fest New Talent Showcase, spotlighting the best emerging Caribbean writers. Stephen lives in Orlando, Florida, where he is visiting professor of English at the Poinciana campus of Valencia College. And as you'll see, I couldn't think of two finer people to be in conversation about Kei's essays. Things I Have Withheld, it is no exaggeration to say, is both an astounding collection and could not be more perfectly suited for the theme of this season. If ever there was writing that brings what is taboo, what is seldom spoken of, what is certain to cause offense and probably should, into the light, it's Kei's essays. I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. As always, if you like what we do at the NGC Bocas Lit Fest, please consider becoming a friend of Bocas Lit Fest. And don't forget, our 2022 NGC Bocas Lit Fest is just around the corner from April 28th to May 1st. Definitely run over to our website and start booking your program events. Now they're going to be all online, all free, including a fully on demand children's festival, which we're very excited about. Without further ado, I hand it over to Stephen and Kei.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It is such an honor, such a privilege to be in conversation with Shivani and with Kai. Uh, I echo everything that Shivani said. There's writing, Toni Morrison has that line where she says, "We do language," and there's some books that remind you that language is a verb before it's a noun, and this collection is very much that. If you're not familiar with Professor Kei Miller, I'll read out a brief biography. He was born in Jamaica in 1978. He read English at the University of the West Indies, received a master's in creative writing from Manchester Metropolitan University, and a PhD in English from the University of Glasgow. He is the author of many books of poetry, fiction, and essays. His collection of poetry, The Cartographer Tries to Map a Way to Zion, which I suppose we're all trying to do in some way, imagines a conversation between a Rasta man with a PhD and a British man who travels to Jamaica to map it, to attempt to map it, only to find himself usefully lost in the process. The collection won the incredibly prestigious Forward Prize for Best Collection. His 2016 novel, Augusttown, won the OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean Literature, and his most recent collection of essays, Things I Have Withheld, received on Sunday, I believe, this year's OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean Nonfiction. The judges described his book like this: a deep and stirring excursion into the taboo, the dark places where truth and reality reside, often unrecognized and silent. Kai currently teaches at the University of Miami. So I just want to say welcome to you, Kai. It's such an honor to see you, such a pleasure to see you.
It is that, I mean, both ways, Stephen. It is so good to see you again. And yeah,
Yeah,
be have this conversation with you. And just thank you to Shivani for, you know, organizing all this and putting up with
all our glitches, all our technical difficulties, we're trying to keep our life excited. We can't.
Yeah, I think so. I think
So,
Shivani is secretly happy that, we bring a little chaos.
yes, and I have to
Sure.
say thank you to Bocas for
Yeah.
everything that it has contributed to my life. I remember when I first met Kai. I don't know if you remember this. This was back in 2012. And at the time, I had just told my very Guyanese, very West Indian parents that I was not going to law school, that I was going to Iowa to study this thing. And I told my father I'm going to a workshop, and he was like, "Oh, that's 2 weeks, and then you'll go to law school." And I'm like, "No, there's
Yeah,
no school." And I remember meeting Kai and just meeting everybody at Bocas and suddenly feeling like there was this family that was welcoming these younger writers who were doing strange things and difficult things and transgressive things. And I certainly didn't think growing up in the Bahamas there would be a forum like this, frankly, that
yeah,
would have existed. So I mean, just endless gratitude for what Bocas does for all of us at various stages of our
absolutely.
lives.
Because it's generous. It's I mean, space making work is important, and not all of us can do it. And so many of the people at Booker are writers themselves, and they give so generously to make space for
Yes.
us. Yeah, immense gratitude.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so Kai, if you could just start us out with a reading, please, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, okay. So I am going to, I switched this last minute, and I'll read the last part of an essay called Sometimes the Only Way Down a Mountain is by Prayer. And this is happening in the middle of, well, right before the pandemic. Anyway, I end up um, in Ethiopia, and this is just a bit of what happens there. In Lalibela, the mountains are monasteries, and the rocks are churches. The holy places never built or constructed in the way we usually think of buildings or constructions. Rather, they are dug into the landscape or chiseled and carved out of the boulders. It is breathtaking to stand in these places and contemplate the work done, to have carved out from a single rock an entire church. This is Africa's Jerusalem, or at least that was the intention, to make a holy place on the continent, so that the early Ethiopian Christians would not have to risk their lives pilgriming across hostile territories to get to the real Jerusalem. So many hundreds of years old, and these churches are still in use. On any given evening, sitting in Lalibela, it might sound as if the rocks and the mountains are chanting. I go up the mountain with Prince as my guide. Prince, who grew up here in Lalibela, who studied biology at university and used to teach in a high school, but the money was too little. He makes more now as a tour guide. Climbing up the mountain is especially loud. It is the day of Emmanuel. We reach and I wander about. Even in the midst of the solemnity and the worship, an argument develops on the mountain. Prince is involved. It takes me a moment to realize I am implicated as well. We are standing in the doorway of one of the worship spaces. A man is sitting on the floor in front of the priest, his camera out and the full zoom of the lens pointing at the priest. So this man sitting down and trying to take his picture has turned around, visibly annoyed by us. Could you come further in? You are blocking the light. Prince does not move. He would have to squeeze himself into a corner to accommodate the man trying to take the photograph. When I realize what is happening, I stand firmly with Prince. The man is trying again to take the picture, but whatever he sees in the viewfinder is obviously too dark. He throws his fist in the air and turns to us again. Could you get out of the damn doorway? He is almost frothing with rage. Prince does not move, and I am standing firmly with Prince. And then Prince can no longer hold his tongue. You are selfish man, sir, he says. You come here into holy place and command people, make people uncomfortable. You are selfish. Two English women are standing behind the sitting man, and in a flustering kind of way, they are suddenly tripping over their own mouths to speak. Oh, no, 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 no. He wasn't making us uncomfortable at all, they protest. I assume by people they could only understand Prince as referring to them, as if he too is not a person in this place, as if he could not possibly be speaking on his own behalf. Yes, I say to the woman, adopting as much of a British accent as I can conjure, but it is rather impolite, don't you think, to come to someone's country and be so rude about things, to bark orders at them like that, don't you think? And they look at me, seemingly stunned, not sure what to make of me. Yes, I suppose, one says, I was just trying to diffuse an argument. I do not say the obvious that, in trying to diffuse the tension, they instinctively came out in defense of the rude man, the man who has now picked up his camera in a huff and stormed out. Prince's hands are now a flurry of activity, his finger constantly going from forehead to chest, then shoulder to shoulder, making the sign of the cross, the way that Haley and the taxi driver had been making this gesture on my first day in Addis Ababa. I'm so sorry, Prince says to me. I did not want to start an argument in a holy place. He seems embarrassed that he has possibly offended me, but even more, that he might have offended his God. I do not know about God, but I try to reassure him that I am not offended. That man was Italian, you see, Prince says, as if that should explain something, and it does. The complicated history between the two countries and these ways that tourism often replicates colonialism. The outsider who feels the native should show deference, should happily squeeze themselves into corners when commanded, but who could never contemplate, yet alone tolerate, bodies such as ours, dark bodies, visiting any of their European cities and making such demands. We walk out of the temple. The Italian man is there at the door waiting on us. He is still obviously bothered. He needs to get something else off his chest. As if he has not already revealed his full self, he looks to both of us and says, you people should be grateful that people like me visit your country. You people should be thankful that we are pouring money into your economy. You people, I have been included because of my body, because of my skin. I have become Ethiopian and worthy of his contempt. He cannot imagine someone like me being similar to himself. He cannot imagine me as the tourist. People like me, he had said next, by which he meant white, though I suspect he is not fully aware of all that he implied. I am seething. I am so very angry at this Italian man who thinks Ethiopians must all obey and grovel before him. I am angry at the English women who seem to only understand themselves as people. I am angry enough to say something, and I wonder, how do we do it? How do we make it through each day when there is so much in the world to be angry about? Prince has ignored the Italian man. He has simply walked ahead. I follow him, skipping from stone to stone and climbing higher up the mountain. Prince stops and takes a seat. I sit away from him, understanding that he maybe needs a moment. The sky is so very large, and the mountains are still chanting, and the landscape spread out before us is holy. I look over to see that Prince's eyes are now closed, and his lips are moving in prayer.
Epigraph to this book is from a speech that James Baldwin delivered at the University of Cambridge in 1965.
Yeah.
And it goes like so. 40 years ago, when I was born, so this would have been 1925, the question of having to deal with what is unspoken by the subjugated, what is never said to the master, was a very remote possibility. It was in no one's mind, right? And when I read that, it made me shiver because I thought of my own father. I thought of my grandfather, certainly my great-grandfather, right? And what those meant, because I think about what we withhold as Black and brown bodies in the spaces we inhabit, but what I'm always touching back to what those men had to contain. And when I think of my grandfather in particular, that stoicism that I realized was everything that he withheld. It wasn't quite stoicism. It was
Right.
something else. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the psychological impact, the imprint on us that we carry, right? And actually, like, in a sense, I'm always, when I write, I always have my mother in mind, my brother in mind, whoever.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think like what is going on in their bodies, in their
Yeah.
spirits, what is held, right? I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, that is. I mean, in one sense, that is what the whole book is about, right? It's just about what happens to the body. But I remember listening to that, and I'd listened to James Baldwin give that speech at Cambridge before, and I don't know why this time listening to it impacted me. Probably because I was suddenly 40,
Yeah.
and so it was this weird mirroring that was happening. That. I guess the impact, I mean, why I shivered is because it seemed that nothing had changed.
Mhm.
Which is a big part of that opening letter to James Baldwin, that the world that he describes is so similar. And I'm not sure, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know what it does to the body. I know it does something, right?
Has to.
But I
Has to.
guess what I thought about was, I mean, exactly what you said, what we have to contain. But all right, when we do not say something, right? When someone offends us and we hold it in, it is as if the job of the dark body is to absorb. It is always to absorb. Things happen, and why you don't say anything is because you are trying to protect the comfort of the person who did you harm. And that just seems I mean, as I grow older, the profundity of that wrong, that there are two things that you have to hold on to in your body. You have to hold on to the wrong that has been done to you.
Yes.
You also have to hold on to, in protecting the other person, you have to doubly hold on to it because you are keeping in everything to protect the person who did you harm.
Right.
And that compounding of things, that there are two hurts that you have to hold on to because you are hurt, you have to protect the person who did you hurt. I am just increasingly angry and frustrated that we do that to ourselves all the time.
I think that's right. I think that's right. And one thing I mentioned Toni Morrison at the beginning. She has this lecture. It's probably the best definition of racism I've ever heard, which is, she says it's a distraction. It's an interview
Right.
she gave in the 90s, and she was like, it's meant to keep you from loving. It's meant to keep you from sovereignty, from worship, from the erotic, right? These things that are pleasurable and generative. It's meant to distract you effectively. But we both live now in America, and it's impossible to, we can't escape this thing we are in, and
Right.
yet so much beyond it, right? But my question is because obviously the theme of this is a change is going to come. I don't want to be pat or simple, but what is the solution? How do we hold on as much as we could to that sense of sovereignty within, you make these references to royalty, to the regal, right? Like, how do we hold on to our sovereignty as people, as individuals?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. I mean, the truth is, I don't know, right?
I'm going easy on you, Kai. You know what I mean? As you can tell,
and
I'm trying to make the most of this hour. You know what I mean?
right. No, but there's so many things that I guess thinking through race that I'm struggling with now.
Yeah.
So one of my big struggles recently is, when you talk about those, or oftentimes when I hear people use language like that about, about sovereignty, just the sovereignty of the individual, which is on one hand fine. I'm great with that, but oftentimes that sovereignty is linked inherently to race, to our, to brownness or blackness,
It's true.
right? This is my struggle recently. If, as we always say, race is a social construct, and we know that we that is a given, but part of my well-being is invested in that idea. As there are so many things that come, so many tensions that you have to live through because of this stupid invention of race, 400 years ago. And yet so much of my identity is invested in that definition, in that category that I know is not real.
Yeah.
How do you reckon with those? How do you reckon with that thing? Is the job now to finally dismantle race and just be human? I mean, if we know that it is a false category of the human, should all our efforts be to dismantle that concept completely? I don't know, because when you think about ideas that like black joy, black girl magic, black boy magic,
Black Lives Matter, right?
yeah, there's so many ways in which we are invested in keeping those definitions alive.
Yeah.
And I struggle with that. I don't know ethically what to do with, on one hand, feeling that this ought to be dismantled, and yet feeling I myself am invested in these categories. When my life brings me joy and gives meaning, it oftentimes is linked to these categories that I know are false. And so much of my sovereignty and my well-being, and again, just my joy in life comes from categories that are problematic.
Mhm.
What do you do with that? I mean, I'm throwing it out, but I don't know yet, and I struggle with that these days.
Yeah, I don't have any. So folks in the audience, I think they got to help us out on this one. But I suppose like where that question was coming from in a lot of ways is just thinking about. I think what I love about this collection is who you privilege in terms of the telling, and it's something I'm constantly thinking about. So some years ago, I wrote an essay called Post-Colonial. Right, I was 25, 26. And it was a review of
Yeah, that's the
Christian.
essay that you wrote that you write at 25, 26.
Yeah, but on Christian Campbell's incredible collection, Running the Dusk. And it's funny because I look at that essay now and I see how problematic it is in preserving a frame that, this post-colonial frame that I realize, as I get old, there have to be other entry points. There have to be other ways of looking at this poetry. And the reality is that there are some frameworks that are very muscular, particularly in America, right? Particularly in the American Academy. So my question is that something, prior to getting to the next reading, is that something that you're thinking about? How are you thinking about reframing wrong frames in the frame of a book, right? Which can allow you to, or in a poem, right? Which can allow you to do that, can allow you to do that powerfully,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that I get invested in that idea of the frame. I mean, your mind is much more. I think your critical sense is. It does things in your mind that my mind doesn't do.
Okay.
So I think how you open that question is just about right, and how I probably how I approach writing. So who I am talking to is important,
Right.
right? And so for instance, this whole book, there's on one hand there's Dion Brand, who I think looms much larger than even James Baldwin.
Yeah.
But let's use James Baldwin as part of the frame. That was super important to me. That who I had to open that book talking to was someone who was Black, someone who was queer, someone who was deeply intelligent, I mean, smarter than me, but whose imagination was always gracious,
Yes.
who I could trust with all of these things that I wanted to say, right? So I think the frame of that book for me, and by frame I mean who am I talking to? It means that I don't mind, quote unquote, the white person reading this book at all,
Right.
but you will read this book as overhearing a conversation that is happening with someone who has no judgment, who is full of love, full of grace, but I can be deeply honest and vulnerable with that person. And
Yes.
so, and of course, again, there's Dion Brand, that I am talking to super compassionate people who are interested in nuance, people who are intelligent, but people whose emotional intelligence is off the chart, right?
Right. Right.
Uh, but importantly, people who I can trust with these things. And so, though James Baldwin opens the book, I hope there are ways in the as the collection continues that you hear echoes of that and you're drawn back into that epistolary space. And so, like just one of the repetins that happens at the beginning, dear James, this is what happened.
Yes.
And in so many essays, though it's not written as a letter, suddenly you will hear, this is what happened. And it's because I want to draw you back into that space, the intimate space of the letter, where what is being said is intimate and vulnerable, but hopefully you can be in a space to hear it and trust it and not put your guards up. And I guess that's what I am searching for now in the books I write, to turn my face to someone who I can trust and allow that to be the frame of the book,
I
if
see.
that makes any sense.
It has an incredible philosophy of art making, because for me there's something inherently devotional about it. And I mean, so many parts of this I had to put the book down, but one of them is when you describe uh this kind of devotion to Baldwin, right? The actual sense of trying to honor him, right? In that way. And that for me, sort of gave me a frame for my own work of how I could think through my own work. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. But if you could, Kai, if you could offer us another reading, please.
All right, let me read a bit from that letter to James Baldwin.
Yes.
Uh,
I was hoping you would do that.
Dear James, I am writing this letter from an airport in Florida, an airport named after the city which it serves, but which you must not confuse for that city. Airports seem to be their own places and never really a part of the cities that claim them. There is such a keen sense as there is in hospitals of formality, sterility, and limbo, of not being in a place but between places, of being in a space between the life where you were and the life that you are heading to. I am always in airports, in this strange collection of wings and tarmac and glass doors and duty free shops. It is at Tallahassee Airport that you describe the meeting of a woman with her chauffeur, the meeting between a white woman and a Black man, and what could pass as friendliness if we did not know any better, if we did not know the codes that allow and the codes that forbid, and the lines that must never be crossed. If she were smiling at me that way, you write, I would expect to shake her hand. But if I should put my hand out, panic, bafflement, and horror would then overtake that face. The atmosphere would darken, and danger, even the threat of death, would immediately fill the air. James, this is what happened. On my first day in my present job, I arrived early, in the dark. before the bird had sung its first song. I was now a full-fledged professor, which seemed to me a spectacular thing, being some years shy of 40 and being, of course, Black. And so I was there in my office, but it was so very early and it was my first day. It took me by surprise when the door began to jiggle, though it seemed to take the cleaning lady by much greater surprise to find someone present after she entered. She took one look at me, screamed, and ran away. And James, I didn't even think much of that. I shrugged and thought in time we would meet officially and laugh at this first bizarre interaction. But soon there was a loud rapping on the door. I opened it to campus security, burly men talking brusquely into their walkie-talkies. We have arrived at the scene, they reported to some disembodied voice of authority on the other end. I had to present IDs and photographs to explain the spectacle of my body in this space to prove that I had every right to be there. And how our titles meant nothing in that moment. I was no longer a professor and the woman a cleaning lady. I was just a Black man and she a white woman, and my presence had terrified her. These were the same old Black codes being enforced in which Black people had to produce ID papers to explain themselves, or spectacular presences in places we are not easily imagined. But I had no way to say any of this, James, to talk about this history that had become so painfully present, and how we all played our roles so brutally, so perfectly. I could not tell them how you had already imagined this moment at an airport in Tallahassee. The panic, the bafflement, the horror, the sense of danger that can suddenly fill the air. Yeah.
Baldwin,
Muted. Sorry.
oh, I think can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Good. So you talk about Dion Brand, you talk about James Baldwin. So many great writers in this collection you reference. But so one thing I'm increasingly thinking about is what we could do devotionally, right? Choosing who we pay devotion to as the act of power, right? Because
Yeah.
we're writers, we're Caribbean writers, we're from all over, we're doing all these different things. But I'm trying in these essays that I'm working on, I'm trying to figure out what is the argument that I'm trying to make, right? And I think one thing is being very careful about, I keep coming back to frame, but to devotion as well, right? So, with that in mind, what does Baldwin mean to you? Like, how did you enter his world and his work? Because, one thing I will say that, he's this incredible essayist, this incredible fiction writer, but he's an orator, as you are an orator. I mean, anybody who's been to a reading with you can feel the audience. There's something somatic. Everybody sort of knows you're about to approach, right? And that's true. That's every time I've heard you read, that's present, and that's present in Baldwin as well. So I was wondering if you could speak to that relationship between you two.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was what I said before, but that is another one of those things. So I am looking for a body that has echoes of mine, right?
Right.
And those are several things. So again, he is Black, but that was an important element for me, that he, like me, grew up in the church.
Yes.
And for me, a big part of writing came from, well, I know my relationship to writing is linked to church in an odd way, right? And
Mine too. Yeah.
we could talk forever about how that happened, how writing became both a move away from the church, but a way to find that presence and but also that a certain kind of technique.
Yeah.
And I've always felt that in Baldwin. And we were both preaching between the ages of like 19 to 23 before we did something else. And that echo always resonated with me. He's a writer who is moving across multiple genres as well. There are just so many echoes, and of course so many differences, but the echoes meant that here was someone who, again, it I mean, you said devotion. I keep on coming back to that word trust.
Yes.
I think the hard thing about why we withhold things, it's because we do not trust when those words are released what will happen.
Right.
The person who is receiving that end could snap, they could close down, they could be defensive. And so you hold on to it because there is effort in saying the thing, but the fear of what those words will produce, the fear that it can come back to you and bite you and do dangerous things to you, it just makes you hold on to it more. But if we were in a place where we could trust that what I say from my heart most deeply, that you will hear it,
Yeah.
that your instinct will be to listen rather than to respond, that for some moment you will simply want to hear. That's a powerful thing. Um,
Yes.
and and I think that's what we're looking for someone we can trust to listen.
Right.
And I think that's what I am, I mean, even though, my because James Baldwin simply exists on the page. So I am constructing him in this moment, right?
Yeah.
On one hand, he's a real person, but in this book, he becomes a kind of literary invention. But I am inventing the perfect listener,
Yeah. I
and I
mean,
think that's what he means to me.
absolutely. Well, I mean, and if we talk about James Baldwin, we have to talk about courage, and we have to talk about profound disagreeableness, right? And there are a lot of conversations that I learned from, because I think a lot of I don't think I write the sort of essays that are necessarily corrective, right? Like I think my criticism is more, I want to know how this thing is made, and I tend to review books that I just admire. You know what I mean? And so there's something like that. But you're probably the most controversial essay in this collection is the white women and the language of bees, right? Which caused a firestorm in a lot of ways, a necessary one. Shivani used that right word to describe this collection and saying the things that a lot of us don't want to say, and I guess for you, I as a writer, as a younger writer here, for the younger ones out here, how do you do that? Like, how do you cultivate that sort of disagreeableness, right? Like knowing that these are friends, right? These are colleagues, these are people you admire, but to put the sort of eloquent criticism, right? Knowing that it will change relationships, it will change dynamics, right? How do you do that as a person, right?
Yeah. Uh, I think sometimes by not knowing, I think sometimes by simply that, by trusting, sometimes that trust doesn't work. But I guess, like many writers, what I feel that the things that are worth saying to the people that we love,
Mm-hmm.
right? And whatever people think, I mean, I think that love has to be a big part of every essay.
Absolutely.
Uh, Therefore, you have to be careful. Um, and again, sometimes this turns around and bites you. But I think one of the advantages of coming from the Caribbean,
Yeah.
and I think about this because I spent so many years in Britain, right? I mean, this is a kind of uh, a kind of snapshot difference. How Black British literature developed, right, is that there was, I think, Black British writers suffered under the sneering criticism of white critics for a long time, right?
Sure.
Um, when
Sure.
white critics approached the works of Black British writers, it was so condescending, so problematic. And I think there developed a kind of code amongst writers that we do not criticize each other, right? We
Well,
don't do that. And so the scene, like how I think about the literary scene now, is that you have writers at the top of their game, but criticism is not a big thing in that environment. As a matter of fact, criticism
Such
is
a
breaking code.
Mhm.
Uh, that isn't what happened in the Caribbean, because we, at least we, if one thing we didn't have that gaze, we didn't have that critical gaze over us. And so at the same time that the writing was developing in the Caribbean, the criticism was developing side by side to it. If you wrote critically about one of your colleagues, it wasn't seen as an attack. It was, this is worth talking about because we are in the same space, because we love each other. It is worth engaging with you. I think that's a kind of blessing that has always come from the Caribbean, that we historically we have always engaged with each other critically. And that might cause a little tension, it might cause a little fuss, but that is a big part of the legacy of where we're from. That it's not seen as bitterness, as jealousy, as backstabbing. It is, this is the conversation worth having. And as a matter of fact, this is a conversation that importantly isn't even looking at the outside in any way. It's, we are home together. Let us sit down and talk this thing out. Um, I think that's how I approach it. I approach it on the shoulders of a legacy that we have. Um, and yeah, again, I don't think so. Sometimes, if you get backlash, I am as surprised as everyone else. I certainly do not go into any essay thinking this is going to cause a storm. I genuinely don't. And if it does, I mean, I pull back and think, oh God, what did I do? Let me read that again. Did I not say this carefully as I wanted to say it? But no, I don't believe in seeking controversy or stirring up an ant's nest unnecessarily. I know that has happened, but it is never the intention.
Right. Tanya Shirley said in the comments that one phrase she really loves is inventing the perfect listener, right? As a means of interrogating the concept of audience. This is going to be an unfair question in a lot of ways. There are 14 gorgeous, gorgeous essays in here. When you look at them as a collective, right?
Uh-huh.
So now that, as an academic now, if you to read this as an academic, what do you think are the seed? What's the seed, the smallest seeds that generate these essays? Like if you were to look at them as a whole, right? Like what is the catalyst? Right?
Uh,
Like what causes Kei Miller to go to put pen to paper? What is it? Is it anger? What is
no,
it?
it's not anger. In all of these essays, I think there is, and it might not work it might not be obvious in every essay, but the seed, I think because of the title of the collection, you can always find it. It's that moment where something happens and you are not allowed to say what you perceive. It is it is the guard who comes into the room, the security people who come in, and we are reenacting something from Baldwin. But in that moment, I am not allowed to say it. I am not allowed to say what is happening. It is the Italian tourist who says, "You people," and I am not allowed to break that down in front of him to say, these are the assumptions you are making. Again, in every moment, I have to withhold, whether because I have to cater to your assumptions, I have to cater to something. And sometimes it'll be odd things, like some essays didn't make it into the final cut. But I'll tell you more of it. Again, it's just littered throughout this book. I'm in New Zealand. I give a talk on stage, kind of like this, but we're actually on stage together. The next day, I'm walking through the streets of Wellington, and an older man, comes up to me and he says, "My God, you're Kei Miller." And I say, "Yes." And he shakes my hand and he's being very warm and gushing. He says, "I was in the audience yesterday. You were incredible. It was so lovely to hear you." And he's going on, and it's kind of overwhelming, that level of praise. But I mean, I'm going, thank you so much for listening. And he says, "And it was so incredible, the shocking disparity between your eloquence and your physical appearance."
Oh my gosh. My
And
goodness.
he genuinely, I think he genuinely did
Amazing.
not mean to offend me, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's that moment where the black body has to absorb.
Yes.
I am not allowed in that moment to say what I think. Because I have to consider he was coming from a generous place, and though I am hurt,
Yes.
I have to absorb the hurt, but I also have to protect him,
Yeah. Wow. That's what an act of generosity on your part,
right?
to
And
be in
again,
that.
in this book, I wondered those. Oh, but you know what? You know what about that moment gets me, and has made me cry. Um, I go back. The end of that story is that he says all of that, and Stephen, I said thank you.
Oh my, yeah. I,
You see, not knowing what to say, I said thank you,
yeah.
something like that. And
Yeah.
the obsession in this book is how do I go back to these moments that haunt me, that fill me with shame and regret, and how do I finally, because if nothing else, I am a writer. Those moments deserved language, and I could not in the moment come up with the language that those moments deserved. Can I go back to them now? Can I look back at these moments where we are so full of emotion and a mix of things that the only thing we can do is withhold? Can I now go back and offer language to what was scarily and frustratingly silent?
One thing that I'm so grateful for, because Shivani said I could ask you to do one more short reading, which gives me a lot of pleasure. So, but before, one thing I did want to, again, offer gratitude for is the vulnerability, because I think, reading your work, I've read your work for many, many years now. And I always thought I had a sense of who Kei Miller was, right? Because based on your read, there's this fortitude and there's a video on YouTube that everybody should watch of you reading from The Cartographer Tries to Map a Way to Zion in Jamaica, I believe outside in this
Okay.
crowd. And it is one of the most transcendent readings of poetry that I've ever witnessed. I mean, it won the Forward Prize. Obviously, the frame of that book, there's dialogue between these two unlikely people, but the passion in every single line is just something that stays with me. So much so that I forgot my question, and thus I think back that. Well, that might be good. Everybody, make sure you check out that reading, because
You're
it's
talking
really.
about vulnerability, you said, that you
Oh
thought.
yeah. That is you on the stairwell in London, right? Like that image of you on the stairwell, not saying this thing, right? In the context of a relationship. I read that and I thought, what a move for a writer to make, to claim that level of vulnerability. It's rare, really, Kai. It is. I mean, in the way that it's presented, and yeah, I wonder if did you feel your writing shift? Do you think, because this does feel incredibly vulnerable, I feel you go becoming more vulnerable than in previous works. I mean, do you feel that as a shift in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I felt it as a shift in this book. I don't know how that will play out in other books, but this book certainly demanded it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that happened though, Stephen, is if sometimes it's just the ruthlessness to the craft. It felt like this book demanded certain kinds of truths, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so you're writing, and I think just give over to the essay, give over to what the essay is demanding,
Right.
um, and I think I'm happy with how the essays come across, right?
Yeah.
And then the book comes out, and people keep on making this comment, and they say, "My God, I can't believe you admitted that. That's so vulnerable." And I think, "Shit,
Yes.
what did I say?"
Right.
And I'm
Right.
going back to the book now, going, "Oh my God."
Yeah. Exactly. Right.
but but I don't think it's always terribly conscious,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Professor Carolyn Cooper, who we all need to listen to, says, "Do not be regretful about your response to the complex compliment. Sometimes thank you is a perfect code for everything." You know what I mean? So that's law in my book. That's
Yeah,
basically it's a statute at this point.
yeah.
But yeah, but I do think
Dr.
one
Carlin,
thing.
but by the way, is just one of the persons who I love most dearly in this world.
But what I think you learned from a professor like Professor Cooper and from yourself, what I learned as a younger Caribbean writer is the importance of the boundary, especially occupying this, going to the Iowa Writers Workshop where given this melanin count and this beard, it was a very interesting, it was a beautiful experience, but I could not be so deferential that I sacrificed what I needed to do on the page, which is a hazard, right? I mean, this is
Right.
Freeport, Bahamas. You know what I mean? You get to the Iowa Writers Workshop. That there's a gap there, and thankfully there were other Caribbean writers there. We could keep each other, we could be each other's barometers when we needed to. But it's something I often think about how you and Marlon James and Shivani and Andre Bagu, like I feel that like you give us this kind of boundary. You did the work, and now we could step in, and that's it's an incredible thing. It's an incredible thing. So Kai, I could talk to you forever, but I realize we only have like 9 more minutes going on, and you're probably tired. I know you're on the road.
No,
Um,
we're good. We're good. We like it.
but if you could just offer us a short reading, and then we'll close up. We'll close up.
Okay, you see, now them people never tell me to I was going to read us next time, but I'm looking for something, and I'll probably read a little bit, because carnival is such a big thing in this book, right? Um, so I'll probably read from the end. Yeah, so I think I'll read from the end of this essay, The Buck, the Bacchanal, and Again the Body. And this is a strange story out of Trinidad Carnival 2019 when all after Carnival, this an Indo Trinidadian family said they're being haunted by a buck, which you would know, Stephen, and Trinis know what a buck is. Jamaicans don't know what a buck is, which is this thing out of Guyana. But what struck me was that the woman said that the buck was from Jamaica. Anyway, so this is the last bit of that essay. But I never once hear about no buck. I know about bull buck and duppy conqueror, but that is not a duppy, just somebody who's so strong and confident and not afraid of bulls or duppies. But here is this buck claiming my own country, even as he doing it in a Trini accent. Listen to what the buck say on the tape. I do afraid pundit Ramish and I do afraid no pastor. It took me a minute before I finally understand that Jamaica in the box mouth don't quite mean Jamaica. It does not signify the country, but instead the body. It is a signifier of blackness and a kind of bad manness and a kind of ruthlessness. I feel a heaviness when I realize this, and I understand now that the story of the buck is frivolous but not frivolous at all. Sometimes when we tell the story of the Caribbean, we tell it as a simple story with only two characters, white man versus black man. But in truth, it had so many other bodies, having so many other interactions and producing so many other stories. Who will tell the story of the black woman and the Indian man? Or the Taino man and the Chinese man, or the Syrian woman and the Chinese woman, and so many other combinations and alliances and betrayals, and children who had inherited these conflicting histories. And how is it that even today we're still so suspicious of each other? What stands between our ability to love each other, even if not these hardly ever told stories that come back to haunt us as bucks? I wonder what it means for this Indo-Trinidadian family to be haunted by an Afro-Jamaican ghost. I want to tell Balmati I take no responsibility for the buck, but I sorry for the history that haunts her. I sorry for the histories that haunt all of us. I so sorry for all them things that we find difficult to face or to talk about because we wish they wasn't real. Just like we sometimes wish this place wasn't real, and that our history wasn't real, and that the present wasn't real, and that the things that haunt was just a figment of our overactive imagination. And I think how sweet Juve morning was this year, how we was walking in that before day morning, how some of us came out as bats and some of us as devils and some of us as just ourselves, because sometimes that is the hardest mask to play. And I remember how we anointed each other with paint and mud and glitter because this was ritual. And I remember the fire coming out of the woman's mouth and the heat that was on our skins. And I remember how we was chipping by the cemetery and how after a while it did feel like things from the cemetery was chipping right behind us. But it was nothing to be afraid of. It was okay. We was as fearless as that Jamaican buck in Gasparillo. And I remember the North Americans who was taking pictures, but how their cameras couldn't capture all that was happening in that rising dawn. For there was things there you could see and other things you could not see. And in this mix of tourist and local, Jumbie and human, the bodied and the bodiless, I think I don't know any time or place more real.
It's funny, Kai, because we have 4 minutes more. Shivani gave me permission to go a few minutes, but that's a good sign. You know that something is happening. But the two things that I want to do. First of all, I believe Jacqueline Bishop wanted to Kelly Baker Josephs asked a question, and I just wanted to make sure it got addressed. So, is there anything you have talked about here that you may have withheld elsewhere? I'll ask it again. Is there anything you have talked about here in this book that you may have withheld elsewhere? Maybe not actively withheld, but maybe not asked or inspired to think through in conversation, right?
I mean, I think we're always discovering these things. I mean, I have to think back through this conversation. But one of the things about this book that strikes me is I don't think this book is titled "All the Things I Have Withheld," right?
Right. Right.
And even looking at what essays I pulled from the book before it was published, which
but Kai, who knows? I'd read it. You know what I mean? Like the part 2 of this.
Yeah, man. There are about 5 essays that at the end I thought, nah, I don't think so. So I guess in the end I'm thinking about just that process, like why do we withhold and when do we withhold? But I just think given the bodies that we live in, that happens constantly and every day. And every time someone asks another question, it's picking further or thinking through again. Oh yeah, I never talked about that before. But I guess what I'm left with though, and it's kind of crippling sometimes, is that every time I think about these things that we withhold,
right,
what cripples me is this, again, the fear of saying it, but the thought that you have to be as careful as possible. Which is why turning to the essay form, it's that I need to sit with this thought, with this response for about 4 months, a year, and craft it. And sometimes, again, even after all that time, you get a response which, probably it's the response that was always due, but there's always that fear that it could be met with such opposition or such tension, no matter how you craft it, no matter how careful you are.
Right. And I would imagine it possibly after that much marination, in a sense, it crystallizes, it becomes something else.
Yeah.
It becomes something else.
Yeah, and this is something I said before. Like, I mean, someone commented that so many of my essays they see the beginnings of it in a Facebook post.
Yeah, correct.
Right, that is true. But the difference is, I think on Facebook I can just comment immediately. Mm-hmm. I think the essay has to be a better person than the writer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
An essay is good, right? And so though you go kind of guns blazing on a Facebook post or social media, when you sit down to craft it as an essay, you have to be as generous to the person as you possibly can. Um, and yeah, and just to give to them their due.
Right.
And I think that's what takes time. It takes time, even when you're in the midst of your emotions, to be generous.
Yeah. Create that distance. Yes.
Yeah.
Great, Kai. So, I want to, I have a lot, but I'll be disciplined. I'll ask one more question. So, imagine you have your elevator pitch, right? You have
Right.
the dream book, play, sculpture, album, whatever it is, like, and you have to, you have your dream publisher, editor, agent in there. What is it? When if I could interject, hopefully Shivani don't get mad at me, but what do we need right now as Caribbean people? What's the thing that we need, right?
Oh, yeah. That's the hardest question. I mean, you know why it's hard, Stephen? It's because I think we are in such a good place right now. I genuinely think that I think it's an exciting time to be a Caribbean writer. There's so much publishing opportunities coming out now that our stories are finally finding, and not finally, but they've always found places. But it seems that publishers in big marketplaces are actively pursuing.
Yes.
So Ayana's book is just what a marvelous.
I know Red Bandwell. I was just about to say that when we were birds.
Brianna just got a publisher. So many young Trini writers, so many Jamaican writers are finding good homes and publishers who are backing them. I just kind of want to live in this moment now without too much complaint. And let's just live in gratitude for a moment. So I don't think I'm in the place of what do we need, because I see so many young writers finding good homes that I'm kind of, yeah, man, let's just celebrate that. So that's answering that part of the question. But in terms of me pitching something, yeah, I mean, I'm not just blowing smoke up people's asses. I have to say, with Ella at Canongate, I think I have a dream editor right there, right?
Right.
And one of the great things about having this wonderful, smart Black woman who is editing you, it's just this freedom to pitch things and to be vulnerable and to say, how does this idea come across? I think there are lots of themes that I began in Things I Have Withheld that I think will become the next book.
Good.
And I won't say more about that just yet, but yeah, there are lots of things that are percolating from that. I think I have this sense of, which is, you should never be the critic of your own work, looking over your own career. But in one hand, I do want to take a kind of step back from writing. Like I feel like, Things I Withheld was, book number 12.
Wow.
And you feel you want to just kind of take a step back and breathe and recuperate and think, what next do I want? What do I want the rest of my writing life to look like? What has my project developed into? So I just want a little bit of space between now and the next books, because I think those next books will be another kind of phase, and I want to be careful about how I enter that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to say as we close, God bless you. We are grateful to you. I mean, and just on your new ventures, your teaching, those are some very, very fortunate students that you're gonna have. So yeah. And
but
thank you
for being such a generous interviewer as well, Stephen. I always enjoy talking with you, and it's time to sit down and read someone's book and engage with them. And so just thank you for doing what you do and making space for us as well. And just not just being a writer, but being so kind of critically attuned and generous to us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to Shivani as well. Thank you to Shivani. Yeah. So I believe this is yeah, thank you all for joining. And yes, I mean, and thank you again to the Bocas Lit Fest for putting this on. Kei's book, which is won the OCM Bocas Prize for nonfiction, published by Grove in the US and by Canongate in the UK. Things I Have Withheld. So again, a pleasure, and I hope everybody has a good rest of their evening. All right.